1 week season.
What is going on, OWS fam? We are back for the final installment in the Industry Experts series, part of the Best Ball Plus package, only at 1 week season. I am joined by another contributing member of the Best Ball Plus product, another contributing member to the DFS product at 1 week season. You know him by Papy. How are we today, my brother?
What's up, man? Good to be here for the first and the last one, I think, this year.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. We were supposed to have Mike join us as well. Mike had to take a leave of absence to take his daughter to the dentist. But yeah, you were the first. Now you're the last, dude. Let's go.
Bookending it.
Yeah, we talked a lot the last time we talked about portfolio management, roster construction stuff. We took some stands on some players. We're going to, at the end of this today, we're going to look back at your personal portfolio because you are just about done, right? Drafting. Okay.
Just about.
I still have a lot to go, and this might be the first time in 3 years that I have not maxed the BBM because I just ran out of time, man. Just ran out of time. I wanted to focus heavier on drafters this season, and I will max that. I'm not going to get the BBM. Only you get like 100 entries in that bad boy, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I think I'm 148 deep on DK, 148 deep on UD, so I'm basically done with both of them. 2 more left on each, and I'm in the People's Republic of PA, so they don't see fit to let me do drafters.
Yeah.
So I didn't have that time drain there, but I don't think I have the capacity for any more than the DK max, the UD max, and then I do FFPC. I do a bunch over there, so I don't know where I would fit. Where I'd fit anything else in, really.
Do you do any of the season-long stuff, the redraft stuff on FFPC, or just all best ball?
No, I do. I play the main event. I've played every year for the past, I think, 4 or 5 years, and I also do 3 of their whatever they call fantasy pros championship or something like that.
Used to be football guys, and now it's fantasy pros.
Yeah, so I do a couple of those, but I always end up feeling like I don't manage my teams well in year because it's like I focus so much on DFS in year that I feel like in the yearly stuff, I don't like, I'm never the guy picking up like Puka, like I'm always like, I know he exists. I'm like, let me get him in DFS. I'm never thinking like, oh yeah, let me go pick him up in my yearly league. I got to do
that's one of the edges. Yeah. That's one of the edges I've found to be most severe, like is moving from DFS to season long stuff is like working that wire because we see it all kind of before the field does.
Yeah. I got to be better at that.
Yeah. Anyway, dude, we have about a week left by the time this goes live of drafting in best ball. But we just got through a week where we had a lot of news thrown at us fire hose style. Teams trimming down from 90, 91, 92 players to 53. So we had a lot going on. We have, I think, the 2 biggest ones for fantasy purposes. Well, there's 2.5, 3, we'll say. Samaje Perine to the Chiefs. Is he going to enter that Jerick McKinnon role? We have Noah Brown going to the Commanders. And signed straight to the active roster. So that should tell us a little bit about kind of what they want him to be for them. And then kind of tertiary, we had the Dante Foreman stuff where he was released. The Browns kept 4 quarterbacks, probably because they were trying to move Huntley or Jameis. And then they released Huntley today and brought Dante Foreman back. When you went through the fire hose of information that was coming down on Tuesday, was there anything else that stuck out to you, or how are you handling those 3 situations moving forward over this final week?
Yeah, those were obviously the big ones. Foreman was kind of a wash, and I don't have really any Foreman or Ford, honestly. Those are 2 people I'm not on, and I'm probably a little bit overweight Chubb, more so because I look at it as drafting for the end of the year instead of the beginning of the year there. I think he's going to come back at the end of the year, and in these playoff style contests, I think he could be valuable late in the year, and those guys will fade. The Noah Brown stuff is interesting because I do think Noah Brown is a pretty decent player, and I didn't like him on the Texans, so I wasn't drafting him on the Texans because I just didn't think he was going to get on the field that much. But now that he goes to the Commanders, and it's like their wide receiver room is so up in the air. What are behind F1? It's like, who is going to be, number 2, who's going to be 3? We really don't know. It's probably the most up in the air receiver room. And then you throw in that Jaden Daniels is a little bit of a wild card himself. And it's like that. There's so much possible variance. I mean, their passing game could totally stink, or it could be really good. It's hard to know. And so I think, I don't have much Noah Brown, if any. I maybe have him on one team or something like that. And it's like, all right, well, in my last 4 rosters, do I want to try to grab him once or twice? Like, I probably will. I sort of did the same with Brown. Dynamy, am I saying that right? Dynamy Brown?
Diami.
Okay, there you go. Diami Brown. Yeah. I didn't have really any of him. And then it was like, okay, well, now he might be the wide receiver 2 there. So let me make sure I grab him on a couple of these last drafts. I mean, that's really how I'm handling it. I'm not going to have a ton of any of them because I didn't draft them all throughout the draft cycle, really. But I'll try to throw a couple of them on the last couple of rosters I have.
I have a very specific and interesting take on those situations. Probably shouldn't have said anything anyway. I dropped it in the game theory session that is being released today as we're recording this, yesterday as you're listening to this, because this should come out Friday. And that was like the final game theory session of the season. So I'm actually just going to redirect everyone to that. I shouldn't have even brought it up. Anyway, it has to do with like ADP value or ADP value versus EV and how that changes based on where in the draft you are. Specifically for these like late movers who are going from like undrafted range to like even last year, if you look at Jerick McKinnon, before he signed, he was being undrafted. And then in the 20th round on DK and drafters, 18th round on underdog. And then he went up to like 12th or 13th round range. So there's a lot of like this misconception of this term we call closing line value versus ADP that I think is worth a listen. So go check that out if you are a member of the Best Ball Plus package. If you're not, there is a link in the description for a discount to go get signed up for Best Ball Plus because we put out evergreen content. Anyway, so I'll redirect everybody there. Shouldn't have even brought it up, I don't think, but that is the big crux of what was covered on the final game theory session that went out yesterday. So go check that out. Yeah, as far as like how I'm handling this Washington Commanders situation, after the team traded Jahan Dotson, that was the white flag, but that was also kind of like the opening of a portal in my mind, in that like this team did not have a wide receiver 2. Like Diami Brown is a 2021 third round pick, has not really earned his way into a consistent starting role over his first 3 years in the league. So 2021, 2022, and 2023. Entering his 4th year, final year of his rookie deal, because he was not a first rounder. So this is it for him. They brought in Olamide Zacchaeus. They have Jamison Crowder, who's at the very, very tail end of his career. They drafted Luke McCaffrey, who just transitioned to wide receiver 2 years ago from quarterback. Very, very tantalizing upside, but he has a lot to work through as far as increasing his exposure to a standard NFL route tree, right? Like he's not used to running these type of routes. They kept Byron Pringle, and it was like, who is their wide receiver 2? Is it going to be Sinnott? Like, is he just going to, because they moved him all over the formation in preseason, is he just going to be their number 2 pass catcher? Are they going to play heavy rates of 12 personnel? I was like, that none of that really makes too much sense to me. We haven't seen Cliff Kingsbury be a heavy 12 rate OC head coach. I don't expect them to be running Zach Ertz and Ben Sinnott on the field together. They're probably going to wait until these roster cuts and go grab somebody. And that's exactly what they did. So like in my mind, I view Noah Brown as the wide receiver 2 immediately. And it's going to take some time for him to ramp up because he has to learn a new playbook in 12 days before week 1. But so week 2, week 3, probably week 3, week 4 range, he should have a pretty good hold on the playbook. He should have a pretty good understanding of route concepts. And I'll shit on Cliff Kingsbury real quick. Learning a Cliff Kingsbury offense, you have to learn 3 routes. So it shouldn't be too fucking hard, right? Like this is a guy where it's like, all right, Noah Brown, you're probably going to be running a lot of goes, dude. And that's probably it. But he's not running crossers and he's not catching the ball behind the line of scrimmage. We'll see. Anyway, rant over. Sorry. This is part of the reason why I'm low on below consensus on Jaden Daniels. But in my mind, yeah, Noah Brown steps in to be the wide receiver 2 immediately on this offense. So when we're talking about like a player that, what, 0.1% he was drafted up to this point with a
Yeah,
week
not
left
much.
of drafts, not even less than that. So when you're talking about a player who was undrafted for 93% of this whole draft cycle, maybe more than that, 95%, and now he is going to be 17th, 18th rounder or 19th, 20th rounder. This is a guy that should get the hair raising on the back of our neck that we should be targeting. How do you feel about that rant real quick before we continue?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the value is that these guys aren't going to be on a lot of rosters. I think the worry is that, you know, they were moved from or cut from their original team and now sent to a totally new team, and so like they might just not be very good. But I think that taking the risk when you're drafting somebody in the last round or two of a best ball draft is really not that big of a risk. And your upside, if hey, this guy has a big year or he just has a big game in the right week and nobody really has him, I think it's worth it. It's something that I'll certainly try to do on my last couple rosters. Like with Brown, I did on my last, you know, once he went into, he looked like might be the wide receiver too. I took him on 1 or 2 rosters. So I certainly think it's good. Perrine being another guy in that mold, you know, will he be the Jerick McKinnon? You know, I don't know. There might not be a Jerick McKinnon there. You know, might just be mostly Pacino. Or maybe there's more of a rotation, you know, behind him. But maybe it is Perrine, you know, and most people aren't going to have him. I think it's actually interesting how that impacted the Denver running backs, because I'm finally seeing my boy Jaleel start to get drafted there. And I'm like, did you guys think Perrine was a threat? Like, is that?
Did you not watch our last time we were together? Damn it!
You not watched me scream Jaleel for 3 straight podcasts since the very beginning of the draft cycle. Like, did you think that this move is what makes him worth more? So, you know, I'm glad that I got all my Jaleel in, because I'm now seeing him start to get drafted, you know, a round or 2 higher. And I the only thing I can think of is because of that move, you know, and I'm just kind of laughing in my head thinking like, this is what did it for you guys. Like, I mean, I don't really think that it should have impacted his value or his role that much, but I guess it did in people's minds.
Yeah, that's an interesting segue. Let's talk about the Broncos real quick. You have notably and very vocally been high on Jaleel McLaughlin. We have a situation where it's like we have an undersized Jaleel McLaughlin. We have Javonte Williams, who is the back that is, I would say, best suited to handle a primary rusher role or a primary running back role, because this team did lead the league in running back targets last year. For Sean Payton. And then we have Audric Estime. I want to anchor on Estime real quick, because this is a guy who is, in my eyes, more like a 2-down grinder and a short yardage type back. And then they come out like, what was it, 10 days ago and say, oh, Audric Estime is like, can be a 3-down back. I was like, really?
Yeah.
What did you make of that whole situation, of those reports that were coming out? And what do you think of that kind of trio right now?
Yeah, I mean, I took the Estime stuff with a grain of salt, and I have some of Estime just because injuries or whatever, or maybe he becomes something, but I don't have a whole lot of him. I really think that that's just something that was coach speak, in my opinion. And if it does happen, I certainly don't think it's happening this year. I think that you're going to see Williams be the guy who is sort of in the old Mark Ingram role. You know, he's going to be the primary early down ball carrier. He's still going to see targets because every running back in this offense sees targets. And I think he's going to probably be the favorite for the goal line role. But if anything, maybe they throw Estime in there around the goal line. And then again, Jaleel he's my highest owned player. 52%. I think I told you very early on he was going to be around 50%.
Wow.
He's going to be that guy. In fact, he's my highest owned player by a wide margin. And, I think he's in the Alvin Kamara role. I think he's going to see a ton of targets this year and a handful of carries every game. And I think he's a baller. I think he can play, all-time leading college football rusher, just been disrespected his whole life because he's small. some guys can just play ball. It doesn't matter that they're small. And I think that he is one of those guys. And so I think he's going to have a very surprising year for a lot of people. I think that he's going to catch a ton of passes. I think that if it's one of those years where he happens to break, some long touchdowns and score from outside of because I don't think he'll be the short yardage guy, but if he scores from outside of the short yardage spots, I think he's going to have a very, very surprising year, and reflecting that in my 50% ownership on him.
Yeah, that's hot, dude. I was looking at my ownership on him when you were talking right there. 23% underdog, 21% on drafters. That I think when we last got together was like right at the beginning of the draft cycle, like maybe a couple weeks after the NFL draft, something like that. And I don't think I had any at that point. So you got me onto him. I've been drafting him, but I think we can be most comfortable with Javonte Williams, and I think he has been undervalued this entire draft cycle, in my opinion. This is a guy who has the 200-pound plus frame. This is a guy who we know has pass catching chops. This is a guy in his rookie season who was near the top of the league in most efficiency metrics that matter to us, like missed tackles forced per carry, explosive run rate, and then he had that injury, and then he had a down year. So it's like, this guy, is he second year now removed from the ACL? Is he going to be another bounce back efficiency type guy? Those were the bets that I was kind of making. But I think overall, this is a backfield that's going to matter in the sense that Sean Payton offenses typically feature their running backs, right? So this is an important backfield, I think, to have exposure to. So once you started hyping Jaleel McLaughlin, I was like, I'm already high on Javonte, and he's kind of remained high for me through all of the FUD and all of the offseason crap. So I've just gotten exposure to both those guys. I have very little estimate. For me, he's a project. For me, I'm not buying the 3-down stuff. But the backfield as a whole, I think, was important to be on. There's another team, or you go ahead. You look like
I was going to say, I'm also overweight on Javonte. So I have 13%, I think, on underdog Javonte. I'm not obviously as overweight, but I'm overweight on him too.
Yeah.
In big board drafts, if you go back further, I think I'm 20% on him. So I'm certainly overweight him. And a lot of teams, I took him and Jaleel. And I basically just said, well, I'm going to try to draft Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara here. Like that, Sean Payton's offenses are known for making two backs valuable. So I'll take them both. And so I think I'm not against Javonte in any way, and I'm actually overweight on both of them.
There's another backfield, little segue here. There's another backfield that is probably going to be fantasy relevant. And then they trimmed the fat fairly significantly at roster cuts down to 2 backs, and that's the Cincinnati Bengals. I've been talking about them the entire off seasons. Look, I don't know if it's Zach Moss. I don't know if it's going to be a 50-50 split and Zach Moss is the goal line guy and works pass catching downs. I don't know if it's going to be Chase Brown on early downs or if he's going to get the schemed usage through the air, which all of that is probably part of what we're going to see. But it didn't matter. I just wanted exposure to both these guys. And then they cut everybody but those 2. They carried 2 running backs into the final 53. What's your take on that situation? How have you been handling it, and how are you going to handle it moving forward?
Yeah, so it's 2 other guys. I'm overweight on both of them. Zach Moss, I think I'm 16% on underdog, and Chase Brown, I think I'm 10 or 11%. So overweight on both. And, it is pretty bold to carry 2 running backs. I mean, it's just such a high injury position that you would think, they would carry 3 just based on the injury risk. But it definitely shows that they think those 2 guys are going to be able to handle, 100% of the work between the 2 of them. Now, what that split is going to look like, I would be BSing you to tell you that I know. I don't, if I had to guess, I would guess Zach Moss is the early down guy and the goal line guy, and Chase Brown is the third down guy and the pass catching guy. But, that's just common sense based on the types of players that they are. So it could be different. It could end up being a very true 50-50 split. It could end up being that they like Chase Brown better, so he plays more. I don't really know exactly how it's going to shake out. I just know that there is a good chance that 100% of the Bengals running back work is going to those two guys. And I think that the Bengals offense is pretty underrated from their ADPs, almost all of them really this year. And so why not? I mean, I don't see much not to like about either of them.
Yep, I'm with you there. I just looked at my splits between Bengals ownership on Underdog and versus Drafters. Drafters was fairly even. It was 12% to 10%. Chase Brown 12%. Zach Moss 10%. On Underdog, I have like 38% Zach Moss.
There you go.
Yeah, that's an interesting split, and I'm not sure why or how that happened. But here we are. All right. With us kind of now transitioning to this final 7-day push to draft these best ball contests, we know that we have kind of, or at least from my experience, what I've seen, my observations, we have kind of softer fields. If you drafting on Drafters, where it shows you how many contest entries a player has in whatever contest you're drafting in, we're seeing a lot of single digit milli drafters in the lobbies over the last 3 or 4 days. There's a lot that goes into that. We had ETR spam their chat saying that, hey, there's overlay, so we get a lot of new users that way. We've had these them popping these promos in. Same thing for DraftKings. Underdog just this past weekend put out a lot of deposit bonus stuff. So we're getting this influx of new drafters. Is that affecting your draft style at all over the final week here?
Yeah, a little bit actually. And it's mostly because people who aren't as experienced have some tendencies that you can almost predict. And one thing that I kind of called it in my own head was I would early in draft seasons when it's all just the nutcases drafting, I would do something that I would call floating a QB, which is my own word in my own head for if I have his stacking partners, I would wait an extra round to take the QB because I could kind of realistically predict that other players wouldn't take him because he didn't stack for them. I don't know what it is about people that are casual or don't play a lot of best ball, but they don't care about stacking, man.
That's a good one.
They will draft 3 QBs in the first, 10 rounds and none of them stack. I mean, I see some of these things and I'm just like, what is going on? Why do you not want to stack? But they don't care. You cannot, with casual players, think that you're going to get a quarterback just because you have all of his stacking partners. No. Just because you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle does not mean they are not drafting Tua 2 rounds above his ADP. They will do it. They do not care. And so you kind of have to factor that in as to, in some ways actually harder to stack, but where the advantage I think comes in is that people don't build rosters properly. And so you end up being able to get some rosters, particularly with maybe 5 or 6 receivers that you really wouldn't have been able to get those caliber of 5 or 6 receivers early in the draft cycle because everybody's fiending receivers. So it's a give and take, but I think one of the biggest things I notice about casual players is that they really don't care about stacking. They will just draft a QB because they don't have one on their roster or because they like that guy or because he's 5 picks past his ADP. They don't care about stacking.
That's interesting you bring that up because I have noticed that too. And what I've noticed is there's a cutoff. There's a cutoff in the quarterback rankings where typically the players after this cutoff will fall further, and the players below this cutoff, before this cutoff, will be drafted higher. And that's right around quarterback 18-19, which is Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford. Right in that range, Matthew Stafford, you'll see him falling for days. Aaron Rodgers falling for days. Deshaun Watson, Baker, Geno, that list of quarterbacks and past will typically fall further because the guys that are not worried about stacking and they just want to get their quarterback position taken care of and they're drafting 2 in the top 12, they're usually drafting those quarterbacks early, right? After that, the quarterback 18 range, I'm seeing them fall. Have you seen any of that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I have seen some of that, and you know how much I love the Titans and I love Levis. Yes, and sometimes you will see him fall to I think I've drafted him at pick 200. So in certain rosters where I didn't even want him because I had 2 other QBs and I didn't have any Titans, and he's there at pick 200, and I'm like, guys, you're forcing my hand. I don't even want 3 QBs here. Now I'm gonna have to draft Tyler Boyd just so I have somebody to stack them with. But I've definitely seen. I didn't think of it in my mind that way as kind of a cutoff. But you're right. It's right around that range where people are I don't want these guys, and it's usually the guys who aren't running QBs, right? It's usually
the pocket guys.
Yeah, like everybody knows you got to draft a running QB, right? We all know that. But actually, I thought everybody knew that you should stack too, but apparently they don't. But like everybody knows you need a running QB. So I think that once you get past like, okay, well now there's no more running QBs left. Everyone's like, oh, these guys are bums. They don't draft them.
You brought up like some very, very triggering words to me because those were all like game theory based. And the background of that is there are specific tenets of what we call Bayesian games, which are games of imperfect information, which like best ball is. One, we don't know the weight of the contributions to the EV equation. So like from a pure mathematical sense, we should be able to calculate expected value via all the known variables and dictate or tailor our game plan to those variables. Well, in best ball, it's so new. Like we know stacking is important. We know that week 17 playoff correlation is important. We know that roster construction is important. We know that drafting the right players is important. We know that positional allocation is important. We have no idea what weight to put on those at different areas of the draft and how that influences EV. So that's imperfect information. We also don't know how the other people that we're playing against are going to behave. So that's more imperfect information. So what you described is taking all of that uncertainty, unknowns, and bringing in our observations. What are people doing that we see? What are people doing around the industry? What are people talking about on Twitter, in Discord? All of that goes into our observations, which we generate assumptions to then exploit the field. So all of that is like this, dude, you just described like game theory methodologies and like thinking through this stuff. Love it. Go ahead.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree with you that you have to adjust the way you approach it based on who you think you're playing, and who you're playing later in the draft cycle is totally different than who you're playing in June. And so you can't have the same expectations like waiting on a QB where you have a stacking partners. Like that's not going to work now, but that will work in June. And so you really have to kind of adjust as you go throughout the draft window, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. You also talked about the fact that with all these casuals coming kind of into the draft pool, we're starting to see like further strays from optimal theory. We're starting to see 2 quarterbacks early. We're starting to see 4 running backs in the first 7 picks. We're starting to see more and more of that, which is a departure from optimal theory. I'll bring up an example. I had a draft where I was drafting on drafters out of the 4 spot. Listen to this start, dude. Justin Jefferson at 4 overall, Cooper Kupp in the 2nd, Jalen Waddle in the 3rd. Very, very unique combination on drafters because they all share a week 6 bye. So we're not typically seeing those guys paired together early in the draft. Michael Pittman, around 3 ADP, falls to me in the 4th round. Zay Flowers, a 3-4 turn guy, falls to me in the 5th round. Keenan Allen, a 5-6 turn guy, falls to me in the 6th round. Anthony Richardson, a 5th rounder, falls to me in the 7th. And this goes on and on. Dak Prescott got him in the 11th round. He is a 8-9 type guy. So like that goes into this idea of what I alluded to earlier, in this idea of like, where does value matter versus ADP? I'm not going to get into all of it because again, this is behind the paywall stuff. But we'll just say ADP value is much more important in the earlier rounds than it is in the later rounds. All right. With that, I want to now shift to your exposures. Let's see how your portfolio played out because you are almost done. I have a lot of drafts still I got to get through. So my ownership, exposure rates, portfolio stuff doesn't really matter yet because there's still a lot of influence to that. But you're almost done. So I want to hear your top exposures and I want to hear some of your big fades, your big stances this year.
Yeah, man, I got my list right here, so I'm gonna be like a newscaster.
Handy dandy notebook. Let's go.
Give me my exposures here, and the exposures I'm going to talk about here are from Underdog. My DK exposures are a little different, but they're not vastly different. So and I just wanted to pick one for the sake of simplicity. So You guys already know, my highest owned player is Jaleel, right? And he's 52% by far and away my highest owned player and underdog. And then the Titans, who I've also said, and really it's all of them. If Spears, I'm 23%, Pollard, I'm 12%, Hopkins, I'm 26%, Boyd, I'm 30%, Ridley, I'm 24%, Chig, I'm 28%, and then Levis, I'm 33%. So that's just a Titans. I feel like the whole offense is undervalued. It's the same thing I did with the Packers last year. Just took their whole offense basically. And the cool part about it is that because none of those guys are super expensive, most of them are backups. Most of them are coming off the bench. Other than really Ridley, who was a little bit higher, and especially when this was another thing with Hopkins, like when he got hurt and he fell all the way to like sometimes outside the top 100. I was like, I'm just going to keep drafting him because he's supposed to be back for week 1 or like maybe miss the first week. And he fell like 40 picks or something. And I was just like, why?
It was glorious. It was glorious.
Yeah. That seems a little bit of an overreaction. And then even once it came out that he was supposed to be back for week 1, it was like his ADP came up from like, I don't know, like late 90s to like late 80s, but it didn't come all the way back up to where it was, which was in like the 60s when he got hurt. So I was kind of thinking to myself, well, like, okay, well, he's supposed to play week 1 earlier and he was in the 60s, and now he's supposed to play week 1 and he's in the late 80s. I guess I'll just keep taking him. So, I just kept drafting him. And then outside of those guys, my biggest stand that I kind of took at wide receiver, and I've mentioned him in earlier podcasts, Christian Watson, 29% Christian Watson. I'm going to draft him, I guess, until he either tears up his hamstrings that he can't run anymore or he's out of the league. But I don't really understand his ADP, and I didn't understand it throughout the draft cycle. I know he has had some Swiss cheese hamstrings, but if he figures out the hamstring thing, which like in theory with modern medical science and going and getting his muscle percentages, measured and all the stuff that he should be able to do over the offseason, like he's got to be able to. I feel like if he figures out the hamstring issues, to me, this guy is a clear wide receiver 1 on his team and a really good player. I mean, when he plays, he produces, and he's big, he's fast. Like, what is not to like? Jordan Love, I think, is a good quarterback. Like, what is not to like here? I never really saw that other than the injury thing, which I'm saying he just, have a season where he doesn't get hurt. So I took a stand there. I kept drafting him, and all the way through, I keep drafting him now. So we'll see. Maybe I'll go down on the Christian Watson ship. It didn't really work out last year because he, pulled his hamstring every time he sneezed. But if he's got that worked out, to me, he's a screaming value.
Yeah, it was interesting to me too. We'll just anchor that
I don't know how you
real
feel
quick.
about it.
Yeah, it was interesting to me too that Jaden Reed has been drafted over Watson for the entirety of the draft cycle. It's like
never got that.
It was
never got that. And if we go to my fades, because those are some of the guys I'm really overweight on. Guess who one of those is? Oh, it's Reed, who I have 1% of. Yeah, I have 1% of him. And again, it's not because I think he's a bad player. I just did not understand his ADP all draft cycle. He's being drafted, and you're starting to see him fall now a little bit, but it was like I did not understand how he was being drafted like in the 60s, in the early 60s, really. And I'm just kind of shaking my head being like, he's getting drafted around guys who are wide receiver 1s on their team, like without any doubt. And I don't even know that he's the wide receiver 2 on his team. So if we're looking at him objectively, like, why is he being drafted here? I didn't understand it. And so that caused me to just fade him. I mean, 1%. And I think the 1% where I took him, he fell to like pick 90 or something. So it's, I don't really understand the Jaden Reed ADP. I haven't understood it all year. I don't know why he's going above Watson. Truly, I could make a case about, I don't know why he's going above Dobbs. So,
or Wicks. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, Wicks is another guy I'm not on because I can't draft a wide receiver 4, at pick 100.
Oh, you got to live a little, dude. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm betting Christian Watson's hamstrings stay healthy, then I'm betting against Wicks there. So I'm not going to load up on Wicks. But it was another one where I just didn't really understand his ADP. But I would probably rather have taken Wicks than Reed, because if Christian Watson goes down, I think Wicks comes into a more valuable role than Reed. I really just think Reed was like playing for last year. It's like everything went his way last year. Guys got hurt. Musgrave got hurt. Watson got hurt. They didn't really have a super strong running game, which could be better now this year with Jacobs. So I just feel like last year everything broke his way, and it's like, okay, well, but we're drafting for this year, so you can't just look at what happened last year. And I really think that's what Reed being up that high was. So I'm out.
Let me talk about Wicks real quick, because his underlying metrics were very Tank Dell-esque. As far as yards per route run, as far as first downs per pass, per target, all the metrics that we kind of know to be sticky year to year, he was kind of near the top of the league in those metrics. So this is a guy that, like, I wrote him up in a couple of places, I think, for other sites this season. It was like, this guy is just always open. He reminds me, not from like stature, because Tank Dell's 5'8" and Dontavian Wicks is 6'1", 6 foot, something like that. But just from what he is able to do against both man and zone coverage. This guy is always open. So, like, I'm okay taking shots with a guy like Dontavian Wicks, who's around like Brandon Cooks and Mike Williams, kind of in that range. Like Josh Downs is kind of around him. So, like, I'm okay like taking shots, particularly in best ball, where it's like we know like single week range of outcomes is so much more important. I was okay like drafting Dontavian.
Yeah, and I'm not as low on him as I am on Reed. I'm 1% Reed. I think I'm 3 or 4% Wick. So it wasn't like a strict fade, but I just, again, like you listed, like Brandon Cooks is a good example. Like I see Brandon Cooks as the wide receiver 2 on his team. And so if I'm looking at a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 4, it's tough for me to pick the wide receiver 4. You know, I almost have to think there's going to be an injury. And again, there could be, but based on my Christian Watson exposure, I'm kind of betting there won't be. So, you know, I just, Wicks was not big for me this year. Sort of in the same vein as Reed, another guy who I'm 1% on that I really didn't understand was Ladd McConkey. I didn't understand, again, the ADP. I mean, he was being drafted high 60s, mid 70s. And this was a guy who I always kind of saw as a slot receiver. I never thought he was going to be the guy there. And then I think that the Chargers offense is going to run the ball a lot more, you know, maybe not exclusively. I think they're still going to throw, but I didn't understand why McConkey was being drafted that high. I mean, he was being drafted around guys on better passing offenses that were clear wide receiver 1s or wide receiver 2s. You know, he's a rookie. It's not like he's proven anything. He might not be that great. I mean, we don't know yet. I just didn't understand it, you know, and so he ends up being a 1% pick for me. Just, I couldn't, and he's starting to fall now too, which, you know, and he's starting to now fall, but all draft season, he was being taken, you know, late 60s, early 70s, just couldn't pull the from there.
And 4 full rounds for a lot of the draft cycle ahead of Josh Palmer. That's down to like 3 rounds difference now in ADP, but like it was pretty big gap.
Yeah. Why? You know, why? I didn't understand that.
I'll show you. I don't know. You're probably not gonna be able to see it, but do you see that list of Ladd McConkey?
Oh, look at that. Yeah.
There's nobody on it.
It's a long list right there. Yeah. He's 1% for me. All right. I'll get into some of my more possibly controversial fades. 1% James Conner. 1% James Conner. Couldn't
spicy.
Couldn't get on Conner this year. It's more of just looking at his age and that he's never played a full season, and that now I think Trey Benson is a good football player. And it was kind of like all during camp, and people were acting like, oh, Trey Benson's not even going to be the RB2. It's going to be DeMarcao or whoever the other guy is there. I just never believed them. I just never believed them. I was like, I've watched Trey Benson play football, and like I've looked at his physical tools, and like they drafted him. I just never believed he wasn't at least going to be the RB2, and an RB2 that I think is going to have a role. And then like you see him in some preseason games, and it's like, dude is explosive. And Trey Benson is a guy that I'm very overweight on, because I think that he will either outright usurp Conner, or I think that Conner will just get hurt like he does every year. And then Benson will come in and they'll see him play and be like, okay, this guy's just, you know, much younger and more explosive, and he'll end up usurping him that way. So I just don't see Conner as getting the volume that he's been getting. And he is almost, I think he's 29. I mean, it's just a tough age for RBs. So I am 1% Conner. I know a lot of people like Conner. I mean, he played for the Steelers for a long time. I like him as a man, but it's just I think Trey Benson is the play there, in my opinion. Yeah, so another guy that I know was kind of in the OWS circle of people liking that I guess I disagreed with was Jonathan Brooks.
Oh,
yeah, 1%, 1%.
Best watch yourself, son.
Yeah, 1% for me on Brooks. And
let's hear it.
That was more just because he's injured, and I thought there was a chance he would start, on the PUP list. But I know people were factoring that in. It's not about the beginning of the year; it's about the end of the year. But really, it's for me, coming off of the injury, we've seen so many running backs just not be the same that first year. And then the other thing is that I think the Panthers' offense stinks. I do. I do not believe that the Panthers' offense is going to be much better this year. I am not a Bryce Young truther. I could throw him. I don't even have him written down, but I'm 1% Bryce Young. I think he stinks. I thought he stunk coming out of the draft. I think he's small and undersized and just not very good, and he benefited from playing on a loaded college team. I think he was a bust of a first overall pick, and I think that the Panthers' offense stinks. I mean, when we look at their receivers, even Deontay Johnson, who was a Steeler for a long time, like he's a great route runner, but he doesn't have good hands, and he's not very he's not very physically imposing. And you got Adam Thielen there, who, I mean, he shook the dust off a little last year, but like, let's be real,
but then died.
Yeah, he's still Adam Thielen. And then you see reports coming out of camp that Jonathan Mingo is beating out Xavier Leggett for the third wide receiver role. And I don't know if you watched Jonathan Mingo last year, but Jonathan Mingo was not very good. And so if Leggett can't even beat out Mingo, like, how good is he? And I haven't heard much about the rookie tight end Sanders. He's probably the guy I have the most of on their offense, just on the, variants of late round tight end could be good. But, I haven't heard many hype things about him. So I don't really see why people are thinking that the Panthers offense is going to take this huge leap forward. I don't think that. And so I kind of was evaluating Brooks as a guy who is coming off an injury, won't play the full season, and is going to be on an offense that I don't think is any good. And so to me, that was not somebody I was interested in drafting.
Counterpoint. Dave Canales. That's it. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's not the one carrying the ball or throwing the ball, though. But
so for me, I saw a lot of people misusing Jonathan Brooks. And I say that because they were drafting as if he was going to avoid PUP and he was going to be on the field come week 3 or week 4. I kind of drafted him, and I'm overweight, Jonathan Brooks, but I drafted him as if I would not get any contribution from Jonathan Brooks. And using a 10th, 11th round pick on a running back you're not expecting to use until after his bye, like, okay, that makes sense. But to me, the upside for Jonathan Brooks in a Dave Canales offense where we know he is likely to utilize one running back, if that running back is Jonathan Brooks after their bye, which is in week 11, like, this could be a difference maker down the stretch. So particularly in playoff style contests, so like on DK and Underdog, I was targeting Jonathan Brooks. And I was doing so in a way that would allow me to get to that point and not need Jonathan Brooks. So like, there's a lot of top offenses with a lot of top, like 24 running backs that have late buys, like week 12, week 14. You have Houston's week 14. You have Baltimore, who's week 14. So there's Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. You've got the Cincinnati backfield that we just talked about in week 12, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of backs that had those like week 12, week 14 buys, not even like considering in that equation, like week 10 buys. There's a lot of good running backs who have week 10 buys. So drafting Jonathan Brooks on rosters where I already had like 2 backs that had week 12, week 14 buys, I thought was a solid upside play for a player that could be a difference maker down the stretch that was being drafted outside the top 7 rounds. So that's kind of how I was handling it. I totally get the downside case, and my rebuttal was just Dave Canales. That kind of tells you enough about that situation.
Yeah, and I get the upside case too. And I think if he was being drafted later, I would have been more willing. But a lot of times he was going right around pick 100. And so my choices were like Zach Moss, Chase Brown, or like Jonathan Brooks. And I just couldn't pull the trigger on him over the guys around him. I feel like it was more of where he was than anything else. Let's see. Another guy that is basically a fade for me is Rashad White. It's 1%.
Rashad.
I would say his name.
I
Yeah,
love it.
yeah, White.
Such a
Yeah,
Chad, dude.
yeah, man, he is 1%.
I'm on
Which
board.
which again is more just because like he's a terrible runner. I mean, if you look at his metrics, like he's not a good runner. He's
As in like bottom of the league.
yeah, like really bad, like
Yeah.
one of the worst. And he's a good pass catcher, like he's good in that role. But with Bucky Irving coming in, which didn't make a lot of sense from a drafting him perspective because you kind of drafted two of the exact same players.
Yeah.
You know, but with Bucky Irving coming in, who I think they're probably going to give some of that passing game role to, because what else are you going to do with him? If White loses any of his passing game role to Irving, which I feel like he has to, then I just don't see him supporting his ADP on his running ability because he's not good. And, he needs a ton of volume to produce what he did last year. I don't think he's going to get that volume this year. And he's being drafted, around guys that I like a lot better, like James Cook, or Joe Mixon, guys that I much rather prefer over him. So I think that was a area where it was just like, yeah, the guys you're being drafted around, I can't click you.
I have 2% on drafters and sub 1% on underdog over Rashad White. So I'm with you there.
We agree there.
Yeah.
The another thing that I want to talk about being overweight on. So from a strategy standpoint, I pretty much went elite tight end this year. And I'll read you my underdog tight end percentages here, and you can see just how much I did this. Kels 22%, Laporta 20%, McBride 19%, Kincaid 11%, Andrews 7%, Kittle 7%, Ingram 7%, Pitts 5%, Ferguson 4%. That means I have 100% of a tight end from Kels to Ferguson
in the first 7 rounds. Yeah.
So I went straight up elite tight end strategy this year. And I did that because last year was not a very good year to have elite tight ends. If you look at last year, Laporta's breakout, obviously, really nullified.
As an 11th, 13th rounder.
Right. And also Kels wasn't very, he wasn't his normal. I think he scored 5 touchdowns last year, which is way below his typical output of touchdowns. We know touchdowns are very fluky year to year. McBride was another one who, he was getting drafted at the very end of drafts that smashed, towards the end of the year once he came in. And so I think that hangover from what happened last year has really influenced tight end ADP this year. And while all of those guys that I just listed are first 7 rounds, or maybe 8 if the lower guys fall a little bit, tight ends, none of them were going in the first 2 or 3 rounds, really. Most of them are late 3rd or early 4th. And so I just think that's a discount on being able to get the best tight ends. I mean, will it be like last year where there's just, late round tight ends who end up being in the top couple? Like maybe not. And I feel
it's like who can do that this year? Like
right.
Ben Sinnott, maybe. Jonnu Smith, maybe.
Yeah,
it's very thin.
Yeah, it's very thin. And the cool part about it is you can take one of those guys I just mentioned and still draft 33% Jonnu Smith, which I have. So
let's go.
So you can still take a roll of the dice on some of those late guys and not really risk that much by having one of the elite guys. So I think this was a great year to go elite tight end strategy because people devalued it based on what happened last year. And so that was from a strategic standpoint, something I just kind of decided I was going to do. Like I was going to come away with a tight end in the first 8 rounds of every draft. And I did. That's really something that was just a strategy element more than even any of those particular guys being like, well, I just think this guy from a player take standpoint is, super good. It was more of just like, I want one of the top tight ends because I feel like they're all discounted.
Let me talk real quick about that too, because this is I think one of the inflection points of this season. This, in addition to like there being a lot of quote unquote like elite tight ends, and for me, I define everybody up to George Kittle as an elite tight end. Because they're either elite for volume, they're either elite for the offense they play on, as in they can score a lot of touchdowns, or they're elite for their yards per route run, their yards per target, all that. stuff like George Kittle, like the efficiency stuff. So that's kind of my cutoff for elite. So I'd 100% agree. And what does that mean? That's like down to tight end 6-7 range, which is where George Kittle has kind of been this year. Beyond that, though, this is also the first year in 15 seasons since we didn't have a clear and away like top tight end that is going to lap the field. I mean, it was like dating back to like Antonio Gates, and then it was like Jimmy Graham, and then we were into Gronk era, and then from Gronk era we went straight into Kelsey era, and Kelsey era has been the last 6 years. So like it's been 15 years since we haven't had like a true and away top tight end that was being drafted in the first round, around the 1-2 turn. I mean, look at last year where Kelsey was going. So yeah, the landscape is very, very different this season compared to any other time we've played best ball.
Yeah. And you know, I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but I think it's correct that Kelsey scored 5 touchdowns last year. And that is,
I think I'd have to look, but yeah, I think that's
right. And like, do we really think he's going to score 5 touchdowns this year? Like, if I set his over under at 5.5 touchdowns this year, how many people are taking the under? So I just think that there's an influence, like people are influenced by what happened last year, but the reality is he just didn't score last year. And so why can't he just have 12 touchdowns this year? And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, why is he a 4th round pick instead of a 1st round pick again? Well, because he didn't score last year. So, you know, I don't think he lost like that much in his game. I don't think that Mahomes is going to stop going to him. Even if he doesn't play as many snaps, like he's going to play in the snaps that matter when they're throwing. So I just think that like we're looking at that all wrong and being like, oh, well, you know, he wasn't what he was. Well, yeah, he just didn't find the end zone last year. Like that happens. Like, who falls into the end zone is fluky.
I think there's 2 sides to that discussion. We'll anchor on Kelsey real quick because I think this is interesting. Yeah, I believe the people saying he's lost a step are 100% accurate. But the only place that I see that on film is at the top of his route. He is no longer the same quickness in and out of routes at the top of the route as he once was. I mean, in his prime 3-4 years ago, where he was just, you could not cover him with a linebacker. You could not cover him with a safety. You could not cover him with a nickel. It just wasn't happening. Now it's like, he's not really running away from a linebacker. He's not really able to like get out of a route ahead of a safety. Like you're seeing a lot of safeties undercut his route. But what should help that is the fact that they just interjected Xavier Worthy and they interjected Hollywood Brown to be able to lessen the number of players that are in the box or in over the middle of the field or wherever he's running his routes, which is going to be heavy, like over the middle of the field. So like, while I think he's lost a step, he's really still really mentally all there. He's really, really good at diagnosing a defense. He is, I mean, we saw in the where was he? I don't know. I think it was just clips of like when he was mic'd up last season, because he wasn't like in receiver and he wasn't like in Hard Knocks or anything, where he was like telling Patrick Mahomes, like, hey, we saw this last play. I bet you we see this play. And he's like, call this. And he's like just screaming at him from like the line as he's walking back to the huddle. And it's like, yeah, this guy is fucking smart. So I think that, yes, while he's lost a step, I think Worthy and Brown being there and being able to manipulate safeties and open up the underneath areas of the field is going to do him wonders.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not worried about him like being a bad player because he maybe lost a step. Like I think his savvy and the position that he plays, and he didn't get any smaller. You know, I think that you know, he's going to be able to be just fine from a making plays standpoint, in my opinion. So, you know, I think he was an easy pick for me in a lot of drafts. You know, 22% is where I landed on him.
Let's do one more fade, or you were just saying 2. Are they fades or overweight?
I was going to go overweight, but I can go fades if you want. I got more.
Yeah, let's do one more fade, and then we're going to wrap because I want to keep this under an hour.
Cool. Last fade I would say is JSN.
Ooh.
Yeah, faded 2%, not quite 1%, but 2%. And I've tried to make my fade list 2% and under here. And yeah, just not a huge fan of him because, again, I think that when Lockett is healthy, it makes him more of the third option on that team than the second. And his ADP, sort of similar to Ladd and Reed, it was up in the late 60s, mid 70s. And it was just around guys that were for sure wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2s on their team. And again, I have not seen it out of JSN. People give him a lot of credit for being this like superstar player, and I haven't seen that yet from him. And maybe he is, and maybe he'll have a sophomore breakout. Maybe Lockett won't be able to stay healthy, but like Lockett and Metcalf have traditionally stayed pretty healthy. And I know they have the new coach and he's going to throw more, but if you look at what he did in Washington, he threw a lot down the field. It actually makes me like Lockett and Metcalf better if JSN is going to be the slot guy more than it makes me like JSN better. And so, and the other thing I'm not super sold on is Geno Smith. Like, I know there's been a lot of like Geno Smith. I feel like it's like the old Joe Flacco. Like, he's an elite dragon. Like, he's not. Like Geno Smith has never been an elite dragon. So I think that you're taking a very mediocre to below average quarterback in a new system with a receiver that I haven't seen a lot out of, who might be the third receiver on his team. And he's being drafted, in the top 75 picks a lot of the time. So that was another guy for me that I just couldn't get behind.
I got to push back on that one. I am very, very bullish on the Seattle Seahawks pass offense this season. We look at the changes that have happened in Seattle. Ryan Grubb coming in, we know that he's probably going to be running a 11 personnel heavy offense, a spread offense, and an offense that is very, very good at layering its route tree. So that is very different from Cliff Kingsbury, who runs a spread offense, but it's horizontally spread and he runs 3 routes. Ryan Grubb's offense is going to take advantage of the entirety of the route tree. They're going to be stretching defenses in the vertical, in the horizontal. They're going to be looking to create these one-on-one mismatches. And I think if JSN is put in those situations, he's going to excel. Also, we had the Seattle Seahawks running 11 personnel. And this is from Warren Sharp over at Sharp Football Analysis. And he included only early downs in the first half of games with the starters on the field. The 11 personnel rates for like top of the league is Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, we expect that 99%. That's crazy. Atlanta Falcons is a surprise, 94%. But Seattle Seahawks, also a surprise. They were right with the Tennessee Titans at 75%. So if this, and typically in today's NFL, we're seeing 11 personnel rates have dropped consistently. They're now a league-wide around like 61% of 11 personnel usage. So if they're coming up on 25% above league average, I think that is going to provide some room for all of these guys in Seattle. That's my perspective.
And it could. And I'm overweight on Lockett and I'm overweight on Metcalf. And it's not that I think the Seattle offense won't benefit from Grubbs. I do think they will. It's more of just where he was being drafted and the role I think he'll fill in that offense and how valuable I think it will be. And I don't think Geno Smith is like a total bum. Like I call him an average or below average quarterback, but he's not. Yeah. He's not like Zach Frightened Child Wilson out there. But he's not a guy that I see as somebody who's going to like support 3 really top receivers like the way I think Stroud could support Diggs and Tank and Collins, because I think Stroud is a baller. I don't see Geno being that guy. And so I think it was more of just like where he's being drafted, his potential role is not being a 1 or 2 in his offense. But it's not that I think the Seattle offense won't benefit. I agree with everything you said that they're going to benefit. And if I were to like the other fades that I listed, I felt like really pretty confident about. I don't feel as confident on the JSN one. That's kind of maybe why I listed him last, and he's 2% instead of 1%. So maybe I'm not quite there, but if 2% and below, I gotta include him on the list.
All right, man. Dude, that's going to do it for not only this podcast, but the entirety of our Best Ball Plus product. This is the last thing you'll see. We have DFS coming up. So from the OWS crew, from Papy, from Mike, from myself, from JM, from Aaron over at 1 Week Season, thank you for coming along this Best Ball Plus ride with us this season. And until next year, we will see you in the draft lobbies. Cannot wait to see you all at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.
1 week season.